My parents skipped my wedding because I tied the knot before my flawless sister, and now relatives are refusing to attend my sister's lavish wedding. My parents claim I tarnished their reputation. I, a 28-year-old woman, married 8 months ago after being in a relationship for 4 years. Everyone came to the wedding, except for my parents and my 26-year-old sister. I wasn't shocked that my sister didn't attend, since we've never really had a great relationship, but I did invite her out of courtesy. My parents not showing up, however, was a surprise. It's no secret that my parents have always favored my sister. She excels at almost everything, and she is undeniably more conventionally beautiful than me. I'm on the shorter and fuller side, while she looks like a supermodel. I'm not exaggerating. She actually dabbled in modeling while she was in college before quitting due to her studies. She graduated with a business degree and quickly landed a job at a well-known company, rapidly advancing in her career. She's young, gorgeous, and accomplished, and my parents have always been prouder of her than of me. Honestly, I can't blame them. She's the one they can boast about. In contrast, I'm quite average. I don't have her looks or her intellect, but I'm not degrading myself. I'm just being practical. Even though I'm not as successful as she is, I'm content with my life. It used to sting that my parents never showed me the same pride they had for her, and they never put in the effort to shower me with the same love and attention. Over time, I accepted it. I tried my best throughout my childhood to get them to treat me the same, but nothing worked. They were obsessed with my sister, and I was never going to measure up, so I stopped trying. Why keep trying to impress people who continually compare you to someone else and never see the good in you? Eventually, I stopped fighting for their approval. I started living my life, and I have to admit, things got a lot better after that. I kept in touch with my parents, though, to avoid unnecessary drama. I knew how concerned they were with maintaining appearances. If I suddenly stopped talking to them and cut them out of my life, they would turn it into a spectacle, and I didn't want the drama. So, I stayed in contact with them on a superficial level while remaining emotionally distant. They didn't seem to mind, since they had my sister to focus on. That was the state of things for the past few years until last year when I got engaged to my long-term boyfriend. Of course, I informed my parents and invited them, but they didn't show up. Honestly, I didn't miss them at the wedding, but it was still a bit surprising because they never even explained why. After the wedding, I decided to confront them. Before the wedding, I had already noticed their lack of response and tried to reach out, but they didn't answer. I thought something was off, but didn't think too much of it at the time because I had other things to focus on. However, after the wedding, I really needed some answers, so I finally decided to call them. When I got in touch with them, they told me they were upset that they didn't receive a formal invitation. I was confused because I knew for certain that I had invited them. My husband and I had gone over the guest list multiple times to ensure no one was left out. We sent both physical and digital invitations, and I knew my parents received one. So when they claimed they hadn't been invited, I knew something was wrong. While they were telling me how insulted they were, I decided to double check, and sure enough, I had indeed sent the invitation. At that point, I realized they were trying to manipulate me into believing it was my fault. I didn't say anything. I simply apologized for my mistake and ended the call. I was frustrated that they were attempting to make me feel guilty for something they had done on purpose. Later, I spoke with my husband about what happened, and he told me he was pretty sure they were upset because I got married before my sister. He believed that was the real reason they skipped my wedding and were now trying to manipulate me into thinking I missed inviting them, thus avoiding admitting their own issues. It was actually my husband who made me realize that they were really just angry because I got married before my sister. At first, I didn't get what he meant, but then he pointed out several things. First, when I called to tell them I was engaged, they seemed stunned, not happy at all. I had assumed they were surprised simply because I was informing them about it, considering our cold relationship. I had only called them before posting on social media because I felt it was my duty as their daughter, thinking it was more polite to do so. I was informing them, but my husband told me he immediately noticed that they weren't pleased with it. as the expression on their faces didn't indicate a pleasant surprise. He didn't bring it up to me then because he didn't want to make a big deal out of it and stress me out. However, even at the engagement party, he could tell that my parents were isolated in a corner, sulking instead of mingling with the guests. When he tried to approach them just to be courteous, he noticed they were on the phone with my sister, and he could hear her crying as they tried to comfort her. It wasn't hard to figure out why they weren't too thrilled about the whole engagement situation. Although he couldn't overhear the conversation, he could make a good guess. As soon as my parents realized he was nearby, they put their phones down and started pretending everything was fine. But by then, it was too late. I was quite shocked when I found out all this, but it explained a lot. The only reason he hadn't told me earlier was because he didn't want to add any more anxiety to what I was already feeling about the wedding. I only discovered it after the wedding, and I'm fairly certain this must have been the real reason they didn't attend. It couldn't have been because they didn't get the invitation, especially after I had double-checked everything. After they didn't show up to the wedding, I decided I wouldn't speak to them anymore, not even for the sake of appearances. I had enough, and if my sister was their only priority, they could stick to that. A couple of weeks ago, I heard from some relatives that my sister got engaged. Apparently, she's been with this guy for the past year, and he proposed, and she accepted. Good for her. I know my parents are going all out for the wedding because they've been boasting about it online. They've already spoken to some of their friends and started looking for big, expensive venues. My sister has been telling our cousins she'll be shopping at Vera Wang, and it's clear it'll be a big event. I didn't care much about it. But then, a few days ago, my parents contacted me and told me it was wrong for me to try to ruin my sister's wedding. I had no idea what they meant, so I told them I hadn't said anything about it and didn't care since we hadn't been in contact for a long time, and I wasn't interested in fighting with them. They told me they knew I had spent the past 8 months after my wedding talking badly about the family, and they were disappointed in me. They said all the relatives they had spoken to so far had shown no interest in attending the engagement party and had already started making excuses to avoid the wedding. They were certain I was behind this because my sister was upset that our family wasn't attending her engagement party and had vented to a cousin of ours. Apparently, I had been telling everyone that my parents didn't come to my wedding because they were upset that my sister wasn't getting married before me, as they would have preferred. They accused me of painting them in a bad light, and now, because of what I said, our family was reluctant to attend the engagement party, let alone the wedding. They did have a point, because after the wedding, whenever relatives asked why my parents hadn't shown up, I'd tell them what I thought. I was very upset about their behavior, and after hearing everything my husband said, I didn't feel the need to hold back. So whenever I bumped into any relatives or attended family events, and they asked me if I had found out why my parents weren't at my wedding, I'd just tell them the truth. In my opinion, I wasn't gossiping or doing anything wrong because, as far as I was concerned, even though they had always been so focused on appearances, they couldn't be bothered to keep up that pretense at my wedding. To them, sparing my sister's feelings was more important. I had learned my lesson. I wasn't going to put in any more effort. After hearing my husband's perspective, I believed honesty was the way to go. I didn't really think about the consequences at the time. I felt people deserved to know the real reason why they weren't at the wedding. I shared what my husband had told me and even mentioned my conversation with my parents. I kept it casual and didn't try to make it sound like I was seeking sympathy, but I didn't hold back my words. What I didn't realize was that word had spread, and now practically everyone in the family knew that my parents didn't attend my wedding because they didn't want my sister to feel bad and because she was their main priority. To top it off, they tried to manipulate me into believing that I hadn't invited them, even though I knew I had sent the invitations. Now, my relatives have decided they don't want to attend my sister's wedding. They want nothing to do with my parents. And the cousin who passed on all this information to my sister had overheard her talking about it for a while. This cousin is quite a gossip, so it wasn't surprising that she spread the news. My parents are very upset. They believe I sabotaged them intentionally and accuse me of being jealous of my sister, which is why I spread these rumors to make them look bad. They claim that my husband fabricated the whole story, that nothing like that happened. And they even accused me of not inviting them on purpose to have an excuse to seek sympathy from relatives. I don't agree with any of their accusations. I'm confident my husband told me the truth, and I know I sent the invitations. What I do feel awkward about is the fact that because of what I told my relatives, they're now choosing not to attend my sister's wedding. Maybe I was wrong for sharing the real reason behind my parents' absence, but given the situation, it felt like the right thing to do. There are several reasons why my sister and I don't get along, and one of the biggest reasons is that she's always trying to bring me down. It's never enough for her that our parents already favor her over me. She has to constantly remind me of it. I don't know what her issue is, but from childhood, she's always found ways to rub things in my face. I never realized that she was far more successful than me when we were kids. She was always at the top of her class, excelled in sports, and was pretty well liked. It seemed like everything was handed to her, but for some reason, she made it her mission to put me down with her sarcastic comments and remarks. She had her circle of friends who, even though I was a senior, tried to bully me daily. I never made a big deal out of it because I didn't see them as important enough to address. At worst, they were just minor annoyances, and although I found them irritating, I didn't care much about them. As for my sister, I honestly thought she'd eventually outgrow that childish behavior, but she didn't. She continued mocking me and taking jabs well into adulthood. Eventually, I just stopped attending events where she would be. I'm not someone who enjoys confrontation, and I avoid people I don't like whenever possible. For the past few years, I've only shown up to family gatherings when absolutely necessary, and when it's something small, I skip it to avoid seeing her. That's the reason we don't get along, and I have no regrets about it. It's not like I didn't try to get along with her when we were younger. But there comes a point when you realize that this isn't the type of person you want in your life. That's the awakening I had a couple of years ago with her, and again, more recently with my parents. The only reason I held on to those relationships for so long, despite the pain they caused, was because they were all I had as family. Sure, I had extended relatives, but it wasn't the same. But now, I truly believe my relatives are more my family than my immediate family ever were. Update. After reading some comments, I started ignoring my parents because I realized that being truthful to my relatives wasn't as bad as they made it seem. I simply shared my perspective, and I should feel guilty for it. When they started bombarding me with texts, I replied and repeated the same thing to them. Then they began arguing, accusing me of trying to ruin their reputation with the rest of the family just because I was jealous of my sister. We were talking on the phone, and before I picked up, I had already decided to be completely honest because I really needed to get it off my chest. When they accused me of jealousy, I admitted it. Yes, I had been jealous, but not for the reasons they thought. I wasn't jealous because she was more accomplished or more conventionally attractive. I had always been envious because they, instead of being impartial, had always preferred her over me. I could understand the world favoring her because of her qualities, but my own parents choosing her over me, that hurt. It was exhausting pretending I didn't care, and being expected to shake it off and act like everything was fine was unreasonable. But I did that, hoping they would eventually start appreciating me for who I am, which never happened. Even when I wasn't trying, I subconsciously hoped for their recognition. That's why I kept quiet about the way they treated me for so many years. But now that I was finally speaking out, they had an issue with it because it made them look bad. Well, tough. If the truth makes them look bad, then maybe they're the problem, not me. If they wanted to be seen as good parents, they should have acted like good parents, and I would have nothing but positive things to say about them. But they handed me this ammunition, so now they have no right to complain when I make them look bad. If I had wanted to tell my relatives how they treated me and made a big deal out of it, I would have done it by now. But instead, They accused me of playing the victim and seeking sympathy. Fine, maybe I was doing that, but instead of calling me repeatedly, trying to make me go back on my words, they should have tried talking to my relatives. Maybe that would have been a better use of their time. Talking to me wasn't going to change anything. I had said everything I needed to say, and if my relatives believed me, then so be it. The bottom line is that I'm not responsible for fixing their reputation. My parents went silent, probably because they were not used to this kind of behavior from me. I'm usually quiet, introverted, and non-confrontational, so they probably expected me to let this go too. But I was done letting them walk all over me, waiting for some day when they would appreciate me. After a brief silence, they finally told me that since I had decided they were terrible parents, they decided they wouldn't try anymore. It was time for them to let me go my own way. They had been expecting me to resolve the situation because they thought of me as family, as their daughter. They assumed I would at least feel some concern. But it was clear I was relieved by their suffering. Now, they told me they had no further expectations of me and that I was free to live my life the way I chose. They assured me they wouldn't interfere with me again. They concluded their little speech by stating that, at the end of the day, both of us were their daughters. Perhaps I felt they had always preferred my sister over me because I was the uncertain one. But that wasn't their fault, and I shouldn't blame them for it. Even at the end, they couldn't accept that part of this was their doing. They needed me to be the villain. It took a lot of restraint to keep quiet, but eventually I didn't say a word because I knew arguing with them would be futile. I didn't want to go in circles with them, so if they wanted to cast me as the antagonist, fine by me. It would at least get them off my back. But now that I had made my feelings clear, now that I had shared my truth with them, I felt lighter and much better. Whatever happens with my sister's wedding or anything else, frankly, I don't care. That's their issue to manage. I'm just going to focus on my own life. Update. A few days ago, I had that conversation with my parents, and today my sister reached out. She sent me a message telling me that whatever I said to my parents was totally wrong, and that they were very upset. After all, they had raised me, done everything for me as parents, and now I couldn't just turn around and tell them they hadn't been good enough. It was incredibly ungrateful. She was acting all high and mighty, clearly relishing the chance to rub it in, pretending to be the epitome of grace and dignity when she was far from it. It really irritated me, so I didn't even respond. I simply blocked her. I thought that would be enough, but a couple of hours later, my husband called me. He told me he had received a message from an unknown number, and sure enough, it was my sister texting him. She essentially said the same thing to him, asking him to convince me to apologize to our parents because what I was doing was wrong. Since he was part of the family now, he couldn't just sit by and let this happen, especially if it made me look foolish. I was furious that she had the nerve to message my husband, but he found it hilarious. He thought it was ridiculous that my family actually believed texting him would somehow work. Thanks to him, I was able to see the humor in it and let it go, because otherwise, I would have really lost it. In the past few days, I haven't really spoken to anyone about what's been going on with my parents, mostly because I've been too busy with work. But if anyone asks or if I run into someone, I'll be honest with them. I'm sure that will upset my parents the most. I'm not one to gossip, but if this causes them distress, then I'm all for it. And the best part is, it's not even gossip. It's simply me telling them how they've actually acted. I don't need to make anything up. Just telling the truth is enough for people to dislike them. The funniest part of all this is that even though they know I'm no longer going to hold back or protect the family reputation by staying silent, they're still going out of their way to make things worse for themselves by pulling stunts like this. Update 3. Hi. So it's been a couple of weeks since my last update, and my parents have started telling everyone in the family that I've been spreading false rumors about them to tarnish their image, all because I was jealous of my sister. They claimed I couldn't handle the idea of people attending her wedding, since it was going to be so much grander than mine. I'm pretty sure they thought this tactic would work, painting me as the bad guy. But most of our family had already decided to side with me. To be honest, I didn't have to try. They already felt that my parents favored my sister far too much when we were growing up. So my version of events was much more believable than whatever my parents were trying to push. Instead of just taking their word for it, people were actually telling me what my parents had been saying behind my back. In short, their plan completely backfired because now people are laughing at them for their foolishness. This is karma at its finest. And I'm honestly glad they chose to expose their true colors to everyone.